Hey guys, it's Hart breaking down this 11 game NBA slate here for Friday night, talking through some of my favorite early look core plays. There's a ton of trade news that we need to go over in regards to the slate that kind of affects it all. It's going to be a very chalky slate as of right now, depending on how the injury news plays out for the rest of the day. So make sure to hit that like button. Check out my Prize Picks video, which will be coming out a little bit after this. We are 6-1 on a nice 6-1 streak there, so make sure to check that out. Look at all my socials linked down below. A free Patreon write up will be out later today, all that good stuff. Make sure you hit that like button. Let's get into the breakdown. So as I mentioned in the intro, guys, there's been a ton of trades that happened. Obviously, the trade deadline happened yesterday, so a lot of teams have kind of shaken things up. So in terms of the value, it's going to be a super chalky value slate today. There's like 8 to 10 options that all look fantastic in terms of like their expected usage and production tonight. So it's just to be deciding between which ones you want to go with. There's really no right or wrong answer. Just it's going to turn out to be just who does the best out of the group. Excuse me. So, with that in mind, this is going to be more of a quick breakdown. You guys can see I've already put in 4 guys who I do really like. I'll talk over them here once I get to their teams. But yeah, it's just to be one of those slates where you kind of just lock in the chalky value and then just get different with your spend up options. But I think it's one of those slates where you could definitely just go all chalk, like cheap value, and you'd have enough of a ceiling to take down a slate. It's one of those nights where there's just so much value that has opened up. It just can be very easy to lock in like 5 to 7 guys that are like $5,000 or less. So stick with me here. It's gonna be a pretty quick one just because of all the trades that have happened and what's kind of opened up on every team. But there are some decent contrarian options here. So on the Phoenix side, we'll have to see how many minutes Booker plays and if Chris Paul plays. If all 3 of them are, if Paul plays and Booker's going to play his minutes limit of like 25, maybe even 30, there's really no standouts for me. Sure, Ayton looks decent there. Craig looks like an okay value play, but maybe you could take a shot on whoever starts so it'd be these 3 would start alongside Torrey Craig, and then whoever starts at like the small forward, power forward position, maybe you could take a shot on them, whether it's Damian Lee, whether it's Josh Okogie, Wainwright, maybe it's Dario Saric. You could take a shot on them. I don't mind them. You also can get 2 of these guys off the bench. They should see decent minutes, but yeah, not a lot of interest as of right now. Maybe more so the value on that team. Indiana is just one of those teams that they're just more like contrarian secondary options. No real standouts. Maybe Benedict Mathurin, we've seen him have some upside there at 4,600. But besides that, everyone's just kind of there, priced about right. Moving on to the Knicks in Philadelphia, another game where it's just like not a ton of interest because there's just not a lot of value. Randall's fine, Brunson's fine, Barrett's fine. Quickly and Grimes look like okay value. I don't think you need to go to Hartenstein or Sims, but they're there. Moving on to Philadelphia, these 2 look great to spin up options in Embiid and Harden. Maxey, Harris, Melton, sure you can get to them as value, but once again, as I mentioned, probably going to say it like 15 times this video, there's just so much cheap value. There's really no need to get to these other guys unless you want to get super contrarian. And I don't advise it just because the value looks so strong and great today, but you can definitely do that. So the Spurs, now this game is interesting because it's 2 very bad teams. A lot of the people are cheap on this, but they're not as cheap as the other value. So maybe you get different, plug in 1 or 2 of these guys, but once again, I don't think there's a need. But yeah, Johnson's questionable. Trey Jones, Sohan both went through shoot around, so they should at least be both in. So they're probably going to start Sohan, Trey Jones, Branham, Bates Diop, and probably Zach Collins. Out of that 5, I love Zach Collins, 4,000. Bassey looks great off the bench if he does play. They'll probably mix in, Doug, Stanley, Roby, maybe a guy like Barlow. Wesley will get some minutes, but I think the standout play is going to be the 2 center options, Zach Collins and Bassey here. And then Trey Jones looks okay at 5,700. I don't mind Sohan, but I think the strong options are going to be Collins and Bassey there at 4,000 and 3,000. Moving on to the Detroit side, kind of the same thing here. If Hayes starts, I think he's my favorite play. Diallo's a decent option off the bench, 3,400 with Sadiq Bey gone. And I don't mind these guys. Bogdan should see 35 minutes. Ivy close to 30. Stewart Duran about 32. Stewart maybe a little bit more, close to 35. So they're all pretty cheap, especially in this game environment. So I don't mind those guys. Charlotte side, Melo's a decent contrarian spin-up option. And then moving down, the best 2 plays are going to be Nick Richards and Mark Williams. I wouldn't be surprised if they split the center minutes evenly. So you can play one of them. You can play both of them in the same lineup. I think they'll be, pretty contrarian. But I love Mark Williams. I love Nick Richards. They're both pretty much the flat minimum price tag. I think they look slightly better than Bassey and Zach Collins just because of the pretty similar production and the price tag. But yeah, those 4 center plays are going to be the best on the slate. Boston, as you can see, I already like Tatum. The rest of the team, they look pretty strong and solid here. Brogdon should be playing well off the bench, good amount of minutes, but everything's kind of priced about right. Moving on to Utah, it's going to be Sexton for me. Laurie's a decent contrarian spend up option. Clarkson is now questionable. If he's out, we can look to a guy like probably Horton Tucker off the bench to start and place for him at 3,400. I think he'd look fantastic. I don't mind what Walker Kessler is just like a more of a spend up option at center, even though he's only 5,700. He's had a massive ceiling. I expect him to play more down the stretch of the season now that they're going to be tanking. So definitely keep an eye out on that. And I will mention Agbaji. Maybe he starts in place of Jordan Clarkson if he doesn't go. He should be in line for like 15 to 25 minutes. He's pretty score independent, but he's definitely there. Toronto side, there's more like contrarian options. Don't mind Siakam. I love targeting Utah with opposing teams' bigs, so Siakam looks great. Rest of the team's there. Maybe you could take a shot on Podol as like a decent contrarian center play, but it really comes down if he starts. If he starts, sure, you can take a shot on him. If he doesn't start, Achua and Boucher still look decent. Houston, Miami. Sengun, Jalen Green are the standout options. They'll both be pretty low owned because it's not the best matchup here against Miami, but they're definitely there. And then sure, you could take a shot on whoever starts for Eric Gordon, but I don't think there's a need because we know Jalen Green, Sengun are going to eat up all the usage. Moving on to Miami, a team that's very short-handed once again. So Bam, Jimmy, Tyler Hero are all going to see huge minutes, 35 to 40 if this game stays close. That's the biggest question mark. And then in terms of value, I think Gabe Vincent still looks pretty strong there, 4,500. And then Strus, Highsmith, they'll see minutes off the bench, so they're decent. They definitely mix into the value plays of today's slate, but they're probably the weakest of the whole bunch. Minnesota and Memphis, big news here is obviously going to be Gobert, Conley, Anderson, if those guys are in Nigel Alexander-Walker. We'll have to see if these guys start at all or if they're going to get minutes, so it's kind of more of like wait for the news there. If those guys are going to be out, obviously Anthony Edwards looks fantastic. Kind of either way, he's going to be the leader of this team in terms of usage, so he looks like a strong spend-up option. Naz Reid would start if Gobert's out. Noel would start if Conley's not going to play. He's coming off a 50 bomb, so he'd be way too cheap there at 3,800. And yeah, that's kind of about it. Just one of those teams we had to wait for the news. Memphis is a team where they're just more of contrarian options. Ja is a spin-up option. These guys are in mid-range, but once again, I don't think there's really need to get to these high like spin-up mid-range options just with how much value's on today's board. Mitchell's there, 8,500, probably the standout for me. On the Pelican side, it's really just the main three for me: CJ, Ingram, J-Val. Prefer Ingram and J-Val, but J-Val's got the risk there with foul trouble. But yeah, those guys look like solid spend up. And then what I mean by spend up is your spend ups can be like 7-8K at most on this slate just because of how much good value there is. So it's definitely going to be a very wacky and wonky slate, but there's just so many options to go over. I'll put together a player pool on my Patreon of just all like the plays I really like, and you guys can kind of decipher from there. On Dallas, it really comes down to if Luka plays. If he plays, you can take a shot on him and Kyrie. I don't love it. It's gonna be interesting to see how that usage plays out. I do think Luka is gonna be Luka still. He's gonna pass a little bit more. Kyrie will probably become more. I think it'll be more of like Spencer Dinwiddie was kind of the de facto Jalen Brunson from last year, this year. But I think Kyrie's going to just be a better version of that. So I don't think it's going to hurt Luka too much. But I think they'll both be decent options. I do think Kyrie's price will probably drop down to like an 8.4, 8.5K guy over the next 2 weeks. Once they get like 2 weeks, 2 games together, he'll be always like a decent GPP option. I think Luka will kind of float in around that 11.4, 11.5K mark. So I still think they're viable, but it really comes down to if Luka's in or out. If he's out, Kyrie would look great. The other options look fine. But if Luka's in, it's really just Luka and Kyrie for me is kind of just very, very contrarian, risky options. On the Sacramento side, Sabonis, Fox, kind of the only two I have interest in, with really only being Sabonis for me. Monk, Herter, they're there in tournament options. Obviously not the best matchup here against Dallas. Even though the team's now different, they did trade away DFS, so maybe it opens up, makes the pace of play a little bit faster. OKC is just one of those teams I really don't have any interest in. SGA is like a fine contrarian spin up. Same thing with Giddey. He's just there. Williams is there, coming off his best game of the season. I don't want to chase that. Lou Dort might be back, though, eating into his usage. And then I guess the only interesting play would be Jalen Williams if he starts again. Coming off the best game of the season, but once again, we know the minutes aren't secure for anyone out of like the main four guys. On the Portland side, another team, not a lot of interest. All fine contrarian spin up options at their price points. Eubanks, Watford splitting the center minutes, but I don't think we need to go to them with all of the great center options at value today. And then I think the favorite play would be Nasir Little if he starts for me, 3,000. He should see at least 30 minutes. He'll be productive when he's out there. So yeah, I think it'd be my favorite play, but that's really it. Really comes down to if he starts or not. And then Milwaukee, I think it's going to come down to how sharp do you want to be? Because they're coming off a back-to-back. They played last night. Could be one of those spots where Giannis doesn't play because I think Kawhi's not playing tomorrow or tonight. So they're resting Kawhi, coming off a back-to-back for Milwaukee. You could definitely see Giannis sit out this game. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. And obviously, it's the last game of the night, so it's going to be super, super hard to build your lineup around this news, especially since it's the last game, but that's going to be the sharp option. So I think if you want to be sharp, you throw in Drew Holiday as one of your guard spots. I know it's going to be hard because there's a ton of guard options to like today, but I think you build around the fact that Giannis might not play, and we see Drew Holiday have massive, massive games without Giannis, like 51, 62, 63.5. All of those three of those games were without Giannis, so he's a massive, massive ceiling without Giannis, so he looked fantastic here. And that's really it. Sure, we can take a shot on Chris Middleton at 5,400. He'd probably see around 25-ish minutes. Who shoot the ball more? You can get to these other like cheaper options, but really it'd just be Drew Holiday and maybe Chris Middleton for me. But that's always an option, but only if Giannis is out. If Giannis is in, they're all just kind of there. And then on the Clipper side, obviously the big news, Kawhi's out. So Paul George, only thing I'll say is this is risky just because Ty Lue said he's going to kind of limit the minutes of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard going into the All-Star break for the next like week and a half. So I'm not sure how many minutes Paul George is going to get. Obviously, he looks fantastic without Kawhi, but is he going to play 30? Is he going to play 25? We just don't know. So it's super, super risky to get in him. I think Powell looks like a strong option, 5,700. Zubac is there, 5,600 as well. Man's going to be another popular guard, played 4,000. Should see about mid-30s minutes. It'll be interesting to see how aggressive he is. He's coming off a decent scoring game, but there's been games where he's just not been aggressive in 35 minutes, even with a guy like Paul George or Kawhi out. So he's definitely a riskier value play option. I expect Batum to probably start at 3,400. I think he's a decent option. So, we'll just kind of have to see. And, if you want to be sharp, you play for Giannis being out. If you want to be risky, you just play for Giannis being in. And that's kind of the route today. It's been a breakdown that's been all over the place. I'm sorry, but there's just so much good news or so much value plays and great plays on this board. It really just comes down to what way you want to go. There's really no right or wrong way like a lot of slates. Today is just more you just plug and play and hope you guys actually play well. These are the ones I like so far. I think Sexton, Hero, Tatum, Richards, and Mark Williams look the best. But we'll have to wait and see with the news. So make sure to stay updated with me on Twitter. Hit that like button, and I'll see you guys in my Price Picks video, which should be out a little bit after this. Peace.